Chapter 24. A Mission in the Underworld. The inner compulsion I was feeling took the form of an order to proceed to the river. This urge tolerated no resistance. It did not have to, because by now I had forgotten how to resist. As I began to walk, I became aware of a feeling of weightlessness. My movements were unusually agile, and my progress seemed effortless. The clear waters of the river seemed to originate from the mountains farther south. I could not tell how deep these waters were, even though at points the river bottom was clearly visible. As I neared the shore, I stopped and gazed into the water. It occurred to me that I should be seeing my reflection, but for some reason I didn't. Because my mind was no longer busily producing thoughts, I was unable to stop questioning. Though several things were happening all around me at once, I could not give anything my attention. I knew, for example, that there was someone near me, though I could not see him. I was unable to wonder who he was or what his business was with me, nor did he bother to try to tell me. I could not remember anything linear that had happened on my way into this place, including the rabbit's message. I was fully present to what I was doing. A bird flew over to me and circled around my neck several times, so close I could have grabbed it. Then it landed on the surface of the water and floated for a while before flying off downstream. Almost immediately, I felt a pull to enter the water, and I knew something was about to happen. As I stepped into the river, I could feel that its bottom was uneven and slippery. Soon, to my surprise, I discovered that I was walking almost on top of the water, which felt warm and agreeable to the touch. The river generated a sensation of delight, and my chilled body soon warmed up to match its temperature. As I reached the middle of the river, I realized that I was walking on something that was like a slightly immersed bridge. As I neared the opposite bank, I looked down and saw my right foot land between two large, staring crocodile eyes. I looked away at once and experienced a strange sinking sensation in my spine. As if it knew I was now aware of it, the crocodile moved downward, bringing the water level close to my knees. I knew beyond doubt that the strange sensation in my spine was responsible for what had occurred, yet I was not afraid. It was normal that crocodiles would team up to form a bridge for me. I had seen them come to my grandfather's funeral. The crocodile has always had a special relationship with my clan, based upon a long ago story of mutual cooperation. And after my return from the seminary, a crocodile had come to me at the river outside my village. In the real world, crocodiles are neither intelligent nor very attractive. A totem animal, however, takes its association with humans very seriously. There had to be 3 or 4 crocodiles of sizable length to cover the entire width of the river. When I finished crossing the river, I never looked back. I felt a pull to walk downstream following the riverbank, and I followed these instructions without hesitation. Everywhere birds and animals were enjoying the peaceful and serene vibration that nature gave off close to the river. None of them seemed disturbed by my presence, nor was I by theirs, though some would have been quite terrifying to me under other circumstances. There was, for example, a huge python with a hairy head that held itself up from the ground with 2 short, powerful clawed legs. As I walked close to it, it stood on guard and rolled its red eyes in their sockets. Some of the creatures I saw that day looked like animals from my world, and some were very strange. After I passed the python, I noticed a woman fish in the water, swimming downstream parallel to me and going at the same speed. I could tell she was part woman because of her braided hair and the huge pair of breasts that hung heavily below her chin. Farther ahead was a family of large monkeys that sat quietly on the beach, watching me approach. One was holding a child in her lap, the same way a human mother would. I walked past them in the same quiet manner as I had walked past the others. I do not recall how long I walked, nor how much distance I covered, but suddenly I felt as if I were being asked to leave the river and walk into the bush. As usual, I obeyed. There were scattered trees in the area I was heading toward. The grass was so tall that I could barely see any distance ahead of me as I walked. The most visible thing was the sky, which still retained the same appearance of imminent dawn that it had displayed when I first entered this realm. I did not wonder where the light came from or why the sun wasn't rising. It seemed normal to me that the underworld could do without direct sunlight and that nature would prosper anyway. I became aware that I was sweating, though I did not feel hot. I decided I must have been walking for a long time. The grass and the trees began to get shorter and shorter, as if I were entering the savanna region of the underworld. All around me were she trees, just as they appeared in the outside world. I continued my progress unconcerned. Finally, I saw a tree that distinguished itself from the others by its unusual size. Tall and heavily branched, with large shining leaves, it held night inside its foliage. Under its vast canopy, smaller trees of diverse nature were grouped according to species, as if by special design. As I came closer, I noticed that they formed a circle around the big tree, as if parading underneath it. I walked straight to the trunk of the large tree, making my way through the smaller ones. The big tree was elevated on huge branching roots. They reminded any who approached that the tree had the same silhouette below the ground as it had above. I counted 6 large roots reaching into the ground, and the same number of large branches some 15 meters above. The trunk of the tree was covered with a gelatinous substance that reminded me of the fluid that covered the boy who had died after returning through the door of light. It never occurred to me to touch it. Under the roots of the tree was a bluish-violet stone that glowed as I looked at it. It had a very bright center whose light increased and decreased, making the stone seem as if it were breathing. I had never seen its like before. Were it not for its glow and its strange color, I would have taken it as a white firestone. It was small enough to be easily grasped in my hand, and I suddenly felt the compulsion to do so. The roots of the tree seemed to form a shield around the stone. To reach the stone, I had to kneel and lean my body at an almost perpendicular angle to the opening between the pair of roots. As I grasped the stone and brought it out through the opening in the roots, it began to glow fiercely. I felt my body growing colder and colder. The stone felt like an ice cube. It stuck to my hand as if some force were holding it there from inside of me. When I stood up and opened my hand, it would not fall off, but clung there, stinging me. Against my will, I closed my fingers around it. My hand was shaking, and so was my whole body. Just as I could not stop holding the stone, I could not stop looking at it. My eyes began to tear in reaction to the luminosity that was getting far too high for the naked eye. It was like a battle. I wanted to get rid of the stone, and the stone would not let go of me. I tried prying it off my palm with the help of my other hand. It too became stuck. It was then that I realized that I was on my own to solve this problem, just as I had been when I had first entered this realm and encountered the unbearable noise level. My hand had taken on a violet color, as if the irradiation of the stone were infectious. The violet glow spread slowly from my palm to my fingers. It was so powerful that I could clearly see it shining through the back of the hand stuck on top of it. The cold I was experiencing was similar to the cold I had felt earlier, only now it was more ferocious. The warm tears pouring out of my eyes quickly froze, blurring my vision. First, it felt as if I were looking through a glass window that grew fatter and fatter from the inside, until I seemed to be looking at the world from the inside of a huge crystal house. In the meantime, the violet infection that had begun in my hand was spreading irremediably. Like a statue, I watched the gradual icing of myself occur from my hands to my arms and outward to the rest of my body. My thoughts and motor abilities, my ability to discriminate, notice and register everything that makes a human feel distinct from things and from other humans was gone. Soon I felt as if I were in the middle of a huge violet egg that had no shell. Inside the egg, there was a whole world, and I was in it. Time had ceased to exist, and there was no sense of motion in anything. In that moment of awareness, I had an epiphany that the light we encounter on the road of death is our being in the act of coming home to itself. I understood that light is our natural state, but that we human beings must help each other as we move toward the shores of light. We must be born and die many times to reach the light, and 10,000 years can pass in a flash. Being in the light is knowing we must get others into it. The soul that has already attained perfect enlightenment returns to life in compassion to help other souls along their journey. The light is where we belong. Everyone who is not in the light is looking forward to being there. So we leave the light to go and experience the need for light, and thus come back to it anew. Then it was as if I were seeing a series of my own past lives, beginning very far back in time. I was in a village, but it was not quite the kind of village I was used to, because there were no mud houses to be seen anywhere. Instead, there were invisible dwellings carved inside of nature, or dwellings that nature itself had carved for the living. Many homes were built using living, growing trees. The branches of the trees were still fresh, even though the houses had been there for a long time. Other homes sat like birds' nests on branches with fresh leaves growing out of them. In that village, I was a young boy who grew very fast into a man. Everything about our lives was magical. We were a family of dwarfs who played at being giants, and we rode in a chariot through the clouds. It rained abundantly, and it felt good to be naked in the rain. Next, I saw myself as a man in migration with many other men, women, and children. Our magical realm had collapsed. The reason for this collapse was the anger of the gods. Someone had cut down a sacred tree, but we discovered this only after it was too late. At that point, there was nothing we could do but leave. As we walked south, we left behind a civilization in smoke. The pyramids we had built rose defiantly above the smoke of our burnt past. The future we walked toward had no contours. The journey was rough. The wide river we walked along was the only living thing in a lifeless emptiness. The days came and went, and we walked. Images from our magnificent past still flashed painfully in our minds. Our sense of loss was immense. Nothing was magical anymore because everything had become ordinary and without power. To be deprived of one's nature is a terrible loss. Some of the people I traveled with stopped at the first sign of vegetation and promised to rebuild. Others continued farther south and stopped in the thick of the jungle, thinking, "No one will find us here, and our gods will never be harmed." I was one of the latter. We began by raising an altar to a female divinity and a shrine to our supreme guardian. The green life came back. It was slow and long and sweet, but we could regain nothing of the powers we had before. We prayed to our gods and to the spirits of our priests that had given their lives so that we might live to rebuild, asking them for their intervention in our great desire to remember. We wanted to believe that they could restore these powers to us. The following generation participated in our rituals with little attachment. Although the great numbers of our offspring signaled a divine blessing, the support of the gods was now limited. The heritage of our magical past was no longer available to us. We could not pierce the primal realm of nature to become part of it as we used to be. We could no longer raise mighty pyramids for our gods. As the original pioneers grew old and joined the light, there was no need for the tribe to linger in nostalgic rituals anymore. And thus it was that, having risen to the highest level of spiritual and cultural achievement, we had to come down once more. When I returned from the light the next time, I tended domestic beasts and lived most of the time in the forest, where my best friends lived, a group of supernatural beings. They were of a world nearby and could travel into my world, even though I could not go into theirs. Because the human world at that time was infested with great unrest and hostility, I soon gave up going back to civilization. I began to live exclusively in the realm of nature, where my magical companions had made a cozy place for me inside a hollow tree. The supernatural beings who had befriended me showed me many secrets. One of these was a potion that could make you invisible. Another could transform the body into anything you wished. You had only to drink and utter the name of the thing you wanted to be. My friends also instructed me in magical speech. We communicated together in a language that I did not speak, but understood perfectly. And so I lived out my life with the beings in the wild, as a friend to them and a caretaker of my fellow humans who came to see me there when they needed some kind of cure. None of their ailments were serious, and I healed some with decoctions and others with words and or willpower. After a long existence of dedication to the ills of others, I decided to leave this life, and so I joined the light. It felt strange and yet very familiar to see myself reborn as a household head, a man who possessed knowledge of caretaking and the mysteries of nature. Our household was large and filled with life. Two important shrines, one dedicated to nature and one dedicated to the ancestors, occupied a central role in my everyday life and responsibilities. There were duties to fulfill in the wild too. I was a hunter, both of medicine and of animals. I was Saber, the ancestor that my grandfather had told me about. Roles were well distributed in my household, and the tasks of keeping the family running smoothly were executed in ways that kept us together appreciably well. I had brothers who helped share the responsibilities of the compound, and their competence gradually enabled me to live a great part of my life in the wild, hunting. Then I would go back to my village, give the animal to my strongest brother, and order him to skin it and give the food to the family. Nature, however, sometimes plays tricks on both humans and animals. Sometimes a spirit will take the shape of an animal to explore the wild at greater leisure. The hunter who mistakes a supernatural animal for a simple one invites serious trouble. One day, I tracked a deer and shot a poison arrow at it. To my great astonishment, it turned into a bull and charged me. Remembering from my last life how to change my shape, I quickly turned into a bird and flew to the top of a tree that I judged high enough to protect me from the bull. At that moment, however, the bull disappeared and a menacing vulture rushed toward me. I had just enough time to remember that a porcupine will counter the temper of a vulture, so I flew down and turned into a porcupine. The vulture disappeared, and I was immediately enveloped by clouds of smoke that made me cough and sneeze to the point where I had to shift form again. I decided to become a bush in the middle of a wide clearing I had reached. No sooner had I turned into a bush than there was another bush next to me that threatened to invade me. When I moved, it moved closer until finally I gave up. Do with me as you wish. I know I should have recognized what you truly were. Whoever you are, I am at your mercy. Saying this, I resumed my human form, and the bush beside me became a very beautiful white lady. She looked like a human, except that her breast hung from her back instead of her front, and she had three eyes. She was taller than I was and wore a loincloth that entrapped her legs so that she could walk only by tiptoeing. She took me to her world, which was reached through a hole in a rock on a hill. Even though this home was inside a rock, it was larger than my house, and a large family lived in it. The men were naked and almost half the size of the women, who were dressed in colorful, undifferentiated outfits. The white lady took me to her room, slept with me, and announced that until further notice, I was going to be her husband. She taught me strange things. They were all about humans, especially how to get into their dreams. I went home in spirit and entered into my younger brother's dream and confirmed what he had divined about me, that I was not dead, but detained by a magical woman whose world was in a rock. As the years passed, however, my brother grew more and more concerned about what the divination had told him. He began to seriously consider organizing my funeral ritual. I expressed my concerns to my wife, who said that we must go tell them not to perform the funeral ritual because then I would die for real. I asked her how we could do that. She said, "Don't worry. We will arrive there one evening, me in the form of a white horse, you as yourself. I will stay nearby while you talk to your brothers. Do not drink or eat anything from them. I know this last goes against your customs of hospitality, but you are not to do anything other than tell them not to perform your funeral ritual." And so we went and did as we were supposed to do. My life was neither sad nor happy. I had 3 children with my new wife. I could not tell if they were boys or girls. They were simply children. In the world of these beings, women had great powers that men took for granted. The women ran almost everything. I was a special case because I was a man from another world, and I had power too because my wife shared her knowledge with me. Over the years, I returned to my brother several times in his dreams. After his death, when his eldest son took charge of the medicine, it was harder to communicate with the family. The mind of this eldest son was so powerful that he could block me out of his dreams. Because of this, I became more and more focused on my life in the rock. The men of the world within the rock were so amorphous that I never connected with any of them as friends. I wanted so much to be a part of the dynamics of the women's life that I felt rejected when I was not invited to any of their great events. One night, there was a meeting of the medicine women going on at the same time as the women warriors' vigil. I knew my wife was at the healer's ceremony that night, so I sneaked in to try and see what role she was playing. By mistake, I stumbled into the meeting of the female warriors and got caught by one of their guards. Because I was a man, I was sentenced to death. I was going to be hurled into what they called the chasm of oblivion. My wife was distressed by the situation, but did not have enough power to repeal the decision. I lived alone in confinement, awaiting my execution. The day came, and I was taken to the edge of a cliff. The crowd was big, most of it composed of women warriors. My wife came to me and whispered in my ear that I was going to be returned to my human family as a child of my own grandson. My children were also present at the execution. There was some kind of coldness between us. They did not cry, and I did not cry. It did not matter. Nor did the prophecy uttered by my wife impress me very much, since I was waiting for my death. As a last message, she told me that because of what I had learned and because of my hunting habits, I was not going to have a quiet life at home. "Once you have belonged here, you can never belong anywhere else," she added sternly. Someone pushed me violently from behind, and down I went. The downward motion was very familiar. It reminded me of my fall through the light hole into another world. The difference was that in this case, I fell into a big pool of liquid and was held floating inside it like a fish. I did not stay there long, however. I remember an event right before my birth that frightened me. There was a loud noise and the voice of someone asking me who I was. I kept telling the person, but he kept asking the same question over and over again. Then the voice demanded that I state my purpose, and I told him the story of my life in the world in a rock, including my execution day when I was hurled down a cliff. All of a sudden, I was drawn toward a very large black hole. I rolled and rolled, trying to resist its horrifying magnetic pull, but I was like a leaf detached from its branch and hurled around by the wind of a storm. As I entered the darkness, I felt an immense asphyxia that was going to kill me if I did not scream. So I screamed. Chapter 25, Returning from the Underworld. The sensation inside the black hole seemed overwhelming. I was sucked inward by a magnetism that seemed particularly designed for my body. Feeling compressed, I screamed in order to survive. The scream produced a chain of echoes around that made me feel as if I were being welcomed somewhere. Suddenly, everything came to a standstill. All around me was a deep silence. It was then that I realized I was standing back under the enormous tree, still holding the stone in my hands. It was still glowing, but it was not sticking to my hands anymore. I no longer felt cold either. I could remember the entire experience I had just lived through, but it bore the aftertaste of a fantastic dream. Actually, I felt more like myself than I had ever felt before. My ability to think and wonder about things had been restored to me. I could question what was going on around me again without feeling pain. For the first time, I could wonder if all this had really happened. It was wonderful to have my mind restored to me, an inquisitive mind that wanted to know everything ahead of time. A turbulent mind quick at getting confused the minute something looked suspicious. A restless mind that chose to set itself into a useless, hyperactive mode at the slightest unusual thing. Presently, this mind informed me that I needed to get organized very fast. First, I needed to know my whereabouts. I wanted to leave very urgently. Something in me willed it. Now that my experience was ended, I was eager to get out of this realm. One thing I understood immediately after my mind was restored to me was the death sentence and my fall into the black hole. There is a saying in the village that with death, one world grieves a loss while another celebrates a birth. Could this be what reincarnation is about? I walked away from the tree to a place where I could see the horizon and looked around. In the direction I thought I had come from, everything was hidden behind a thick jungle. Farther north, I saw some mountains that appeared familiar, but were nowhere near a day's walk. The need to return to the initiation camp grew stronger and stronger in me until finally, all I could do was to circle around and around in search of a solution. The thought of retracing my steps was not appealing, especially when it included the part about crossing the river on the backs of crocodiles. Besides, I had lost track of the hole where I had exited from the mountain. I continued circling around the tree, making wider and wider orbits. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I saw a girl, a real village daughter, as my people would call her. She was carrying a clay pot containing water. Most of her naked body was wet with the water that had splashed out of the pot as she walked. She was heavily beaded up around her waist, strand after strand of colorful beads typical of what young village girls wear. This signaled that she was nearing puberty. For a while, I felt an immense relief at finding her. There was no doubt that she knew where she was going and must have some reasonable knowledge of this region. I did not have to call out to her since we practically walked into each other. She stopped, looked me over swiftly in the typical village way, then kept her face lowered and her eyes on the ground. I was so happy to see another human being in this realm, especially after what had happened to me, that I almost hugged her. Though I had wanted to inquire about this region and her business in it, I instead found myself asking her for directions. She looked around at the four directions, one after the other, and said, pointing west, "You see these mountains over there?" There was a line of three mountains. One looked like an elderly woman, the other like a dog, and the last one like a formless mass. "Yes, go to the dog mountain, the one in the middle, and cross to the other side of it. There is a cave there. That is your way home." Saying this, she walked away. I watched her, stunned, till she disappeared behind a grove. The trees hid her. I began to sort things out in my mind, trying to make the new experiences in my brain agree with one another, when I felt a profound sense of urgency. It felt like a sudden, unspecified sense of danger. I began to rush toward the dog mountain. Everything else around me landscape Trees, rivers, hills faded out. The dog mountain appeared on my visual horizon like a picture. By the time I reached it, I did not even know how much distance I had covered. From then on, everything was done in a rush. I found the cave the girl had told me about and ran in. It became dark as soon as I reached its interior. I reproached myself for not having taken the time to make a torch, but I wasn't very hard on myself. As I walked farther into the cave, I noticed that it did not get any darker. Then I realized it must be nighttime in the world I was going back to because I could see some stars twinkling ahead of me. Their light was unmistakable. I walked toward them, but suddenly stopped and realized that I couldn't be seeing stars. I was still inside the cave. Looking up, I found out that I was indeed inside the cave, but near the exit. I could see the stony ceiling there 2 or 3 feet above me. I had crossed back through the mountain almost instantaneously, without even having to crawl this time. How had all this happened? Looking behind me, I realized that this cave was like any other cave, as black as the black hole of my dream, with no suggestion of a light existing on the other side of it. There was no suggestion of the place on the other side of it where I had come in. Meanwhile, the night in our world was nearing its end. I could see the shepherd star high up in the sky, brightest among the bright stars, and I thought the animals from the underworld must have come back from their nightly errand. I wish I had met that rabbit for one last time. Something bit me inside my hand. I looked. It was the blue stone, my only proof that what had happened had been real. As I looked at it this time, it remained undifferentiated. Only its otherworldly color defied the obscurity of the night. It never glowed again. I closed my hand around it. I had nothing to put it in, but the direct contact with it was extremely valuable to me. I needed it. I prepared myself for the long trip back down the mountain, jumping from stone to stone. Then I realized there were no stones anywhere near the size I had walked on before. I looked again very hard. Where was I? When I turned around to check the cave behind me, I realized it was not the egg-shaped cave I had first entered. I looked at the shepherd star again. No doubt about it, I was east of the camp. But how could that have happened? I had exited the mountain over 15 kilometers from the place where I had entered. I began walking west toward the camp. The ground was covered with tiny gravel and sparse grass, ideal for walking with bare feet. I rushed down to the valley and began trekking at a regular pace while I reviewed the events that had just happened. My entry into the underworld was too painful to dwell upon. I had no way of comprehending what caused these inner noises that had tortured me so. The cold itself was also incomprehensible. The girl who had told me how to get out of the cave intrigued me the most. It was not her presence there that fascinated me, but her timely appearance just when I needed some direction. Her manners and her look were so ordinary after all the exotic things that I had experienced that she made me feel at home instantly. Why a girl rather than a boy? Without her, I would have still been in the underworld, looking for the exit. I felt as if I owed it to her to try to complete my journey before sunrise. If I could do that, I would probably be the only one to finish before the deadline. I took pleasure at the thought of being the first to arrive at the camp, feeling exceptional and proud of having gone through it all. Nonetheless, I could not stop thinking that I should have stayed with the girl a little while longer to get to know her. A village girl would never ask questions of a man. It went against our customs. Instead, it had been my responsibility to inquire about things. I should have asked what she was doing in the region and where she was heading rather than ask for simple directions. I could have obtained valuable information about the underworld from her, especially about where people lived there. What was I going to tell the elders? That all I had brought them was a stone? What if they told me it had been my last opportunity for knowledge and that I had let it go? It had all happened so suddenly, and I had been confused about finding a way out of the place. And where had the immense sense of urgency come from? I began making excuses for myself. I continued trying to make sense of my experiences. When I thought about the crocodiles who had made a living bridge for me across the river, the recollection was neither frightening nor painful. I even wondered if the rabbit's father had arranged for the crocodiles to give me a lift across the river. I also could not help thinking that if the crocodiles had made a bridge across the river when we were first heading for the mountains as a group, it might have saved a life. The unfortunate boy who had died so horribly, attacked by the underwater creatures, might have survived. Initiation is an extremely individualistic, self-centered activity. The camaraderie you feel with the elders and the other boys may try to hide that, but ultimately no one will save you if you fail to remember what you need to survive. No friend will do for you what you are supposed to do for yourself in order to further your own process. We, as a group, do not constitute a village where people support one another spontaneously. Our purpose is not to save one another if the need arises, but to learn. The real society is the one we left behind. Those who survive the ordeal of initiation will have the privilege of being reintegrated into it as real people. The community is a body in which every individual is a cell. No harmful or inappropriate cell is allowed to remain in the body. One way or the other, it will be ejected. One must learn how to function as a healthy cell in order to earn the privilege of staying in the body and keeping it alive. Just as we came in this world alone, so we remember alone. The elders who facilitate our act of remembering do not mind what we remember as long as we do exactly what we are supposed to do, according to our true nature. So it seems that, after all, at the deepest level, the Daggara are an incurably private people. The sharing of our knowledge stops at the doors of the esoteric. During the rituals of initiation or daily life, the presence of the other is symbolic. What I know may be dangerous for you to know and vice versa. Furthermore, to try to learn what the other knows is to distract oneself from really acting upon one's own memory. Our memory is not something static that we petrify and store in the inner museum of our being. We already have everything we need for life inside of us. If we do not act upon these memories, we fail to live in this transient world. Some live in order to remember and others live because they do remember. I began to realize that everything I had experienced in my month of initiation was about learning how to recall what I already knew. The careful reader may be asking him or herself right now why I say I have been in the bush for a month when I have only described 6 or 7 days and nights. I have had to trick the reader in this way in order to provide a sense of continuity to my narrative. This trick was necessary because without areas of silence, I would not have been able to tell you about my initiation experience at all. What I have shared with you here is very potent and special information. Before I sat down to write this book, I first had to get permission from my council of elders. The episodes I have been able to present in this book are the ones Gizo thought I could speak about. There are others that I am not at liberty to ever write about. They constitute the bulk of the initiatory experience and its most secret parts. As I walked toward the camp, my mind came back to me fully. I was now able to fit things into their right perspective, one that made all the violence I had seen, all the hallucinations and interactions with the magic of the natural world make sense. All of a sudden, the conflicts that had roared in me had ceased to exist thanks to the powerful intervention of initiation. The emptiness that had filled me when I had joined the group over 30 days ago, and the suffering I had undergone to achieve true arrival, now seemed justified. I was full. I felt content, oriented, and unconcerned. I was home. Yet I did not know what exactly permitted me to feel the way I felt. The hardships of initiation did not flow along an even gradient of learning like the education I had been accustomed to at the seminary. At the outset, Initiation had appeared like a set of weird, unconnected events, but their result was a state of surrender and, much later, contentment. At the seminary, I had grown away from myself into a mold that tried to make me into someone I wasn't, while all the while I craved for myself. As long as we are not ourselves, we will try to be what other people are. If these people are also not themselves, the result is terrible. During the dagger initiation process, I grew into myself. The problems I had became resolved as I entered into my own true nature. When I finally reached the initiation quarter, the night was nearly over and the eastern sky was brightening. Without a word, I handed the stone to the first elder I saw and waited for instructions. The old man looked at it very carefully and nodded with satisfaction as he passed it on to another elder who examined it in the same manner before passing it along. I waited till they had all looked at the magic stone. Then the elder to whom I had first given the stone got up, walked a little apart from the circle, and beckoned to me. I remembered the girl in the underworld whom I had failed to speak with longer. Apprehensive and anxious, I realized that I needed to confess my failure to the elder then and there to escape from this strange feeling. I joined the elder and we walked in silence for a while till he sat down on the grass. I imitated him. We remained that way for a while in silence until he spoke. "Look at me," he said. I looked at him. He was emaciated and his painted face did not seem to have any individual characteristics about it. For me, the elders were archetypal. They were symbols or conduits, not necessarily humans. Why should I try to change that? I was a little embarrassed to be looking so boldly into the face of an elder. This is not something one does unless directly ordered to. I had learned that quickly after my return from the seminary. "What do you see?" the old man inquired. I wondered what he meant. I did not know him personally, so I could not see anything other than a man in him. "Look hard," he insisted. He moved his face closer to mine. I was a bit frightened by the dark holes of his eyes, which contrasted so greatly with the extreme whiteness of his painted face. I saw nothing in those eyes, even though I could sense that he was tense with excitement. As if unable to hold back any longer, he said, "I am Gizo, the same Gizo who first worked on you when you returned from the white man's initiation place, the one you and your father have been consulting ever since. Don't you remember? It was only last rainy season. Don't you recognize me?" I remembered the man whose house my father and I had visited early one morning to find him sitting at the edge of his Zengala. Then he had said that my case was the fulfillment of his career, that he had been waiting for me for 2 years. I remembered that a few weeks later he had prepared medicine for us and then tested it out later when we were on the way home by showing himself to us as a white bull standing on its hind legs in the middle of the night. Then it had been a dream, but now I understood it. The white bull is the symbol of prosperity in life. It is what suitors give as dowries when they come seeking their brides. The image of the white bull came to memory, and the white cow on the hill, and the man who had held me by the hand as we walked toward the rest of the people after my experience under the water. It all made sense. "It's me," he said again with satisfaction. "I knew you did not recognize me. You could not, and it was good that you didn't. I am very pleased with your success in this last mission. You are now one of us. I am happy for you. Are you glad to know the way of your ancestors?" "Yes," I replied mechanically. I did not know whether I knew the way of my ancestors yet, but it felt wonderful to be sitting next to a delighted elder. Giso's heart was fatherly, loving, and satisfied. He had revealed his identity to me because now there was no more danger. The intensity of his joy showed me how much he had been looking forward to the day when he could see me come home. He had watched out for me secretly all along without my having an inkling of his support. I was so touched by his poise and wisdom that all I wanted to do was sit beside him in silence. Gizo, however, wanted to talk. It's all over now. We will be going home soon. There will be no further missions or exercises. You are now a man. That is, you are your own mission. Do not be worried anymore. The last mission was the most dangerous, and you made it. I am happy. We lost someone on the way to the mountains, I ventured. We know someone always gets lost. There are 4 who will never go home. You are not one of them. Yet if there was someone best fitted to being overcome by this experience, it was you. But you do have real hunter's blood underneath your skin after all. Who is that girl I met in the underworld? I asked. Gizo's eyes narrowed and he frowned. You met a girl in the underworld? Oh, that could have something to do with what happened to you when you found the stone. See, that's your experience. I don't know why it had to be a girl. A long time ago, when I was going through this, I also went to the underworld. A snake showed me the way out. No one knows what is going to happen before you get there. I am glad you saw a real person, even though it must have been a transformation. It does not matter now, as long as you are here. You do not need to understand everything right away. You can't. You have the rest of your life to figure out the meaning of what really went on during the 6 weeks you spent here. So don't be in any hurry. Be happy you did not stay behind. Our conversation was not running in the direction I had wished. My mind was boiling with images that needed to be fitted into one another, but Gizo seemed only to want to get reacquainted before we returned to the village. So I resumed the posture of the listener who does not ask questions. When he saw this, he said, I see you need to rest. You will need to be ready when packing time comes. And since you have nothing to do between now and then, why don't you take it easy? I'll get going with my business too, and we will meet again many times before I die. Saying this, he got up and walked away before I could utter another word. At the sleeping quarter, I found Yangali snoring. I lay down quietly to avoid waking him. The sun had not quite risen, and there were no more stars to be seen in the brightly lit sky. I slept. When I woke up, Yangali was sitting next to me. The heat of the sun must have wakened me, for I was sweating profusely. Nyangali asked if I was hungry, and we went into the bush in search of something to eat. That afternoon was quiet. For the first time since we had arrived at the camp, we had some real free time. No commands came from anyone, not even the order to have free time. We used it in silence. Overwhelmed by our last mission, we communicated with one another silently, as if sound were prohibited. People walked at random around the camp, alone or in groups, hands crossed behind their backs as if they were meditating on what had just happened. The elders, on the other hand, seemed busy. By the end of the afternoon, they had sacrificed some fowl and a black goat to the nature shrine, a dog to the spirits of the underworld, and a black goat to the ancestors. No one knew where these domestic animals came from or who delivered them to the council. We were going home the following day, but we were leaving without some of our number. Those who had been absorbed had to be honored, and this is what the elders were doing. We could not participate in these ceremonies because we were still too open. A newly initiated person is as vulnerable as a sick person who has passed the most critical stage of his or her illness and is now convalescing. No one had to tell us not to participate in the funeral ritual of the departed ones. We knew. That night we did nothing. As if humbled by all the intense days, we went to sleep very early. As I lay there watching the crescent moon, I thought to myself, what if I had gone to the moon last night? The earth has so many vortex points through which one can reach almost anywhere. Far beyond the moon, the stars twinkled rhythmically, dancing to unheard cosmic music. I neither admired this perfect harmony nor felt detached from it. Somehow I could just be and let be. The sound of a snoring sleeper knocked at the doors of my ears, and my thoughts followed it backward to its source. A man asleep is like a child in nature's lap. It does not take trust to reach this level of abandonment, only the craving. Yesterday a boy, today a man, but still the same person. It is too hard to be a man, yet I wanted to live my life. So I went to sleep. Stay tuned for part 19 coming soon. Peace, blessings, and much love to you all. On Earth, there was once a people who held the knowledge of the universe across space and time. They were the Israelites. Over time, their wisdom was scattered among all nations, with each taking a piece. In the end, this left them destitute. Now, listen to this profound wisdom passed down through great works, presented in your voice, from your own perspective, from the perspective of the Israelites themselves. For early access to chapters and full audiobooks, consider becoming a member. For just $10 per month, you can unlock exclusive access to this priceless wisdom, once stolen from our ancestors. Hear their voices through your own as you join us on this journey of discovery and reclamation.